Hello everyone. We are back with our Women in Art with Lee Miller today, who's a photographer or photographer. That's a little easier to say. She was born in 1907 and died in 1977. Elizabeth Lee Miller was born in New York in 1907, and she became interested in photography as a young child. While attending the Art Student League of New York, she was saved from being struck by an oncoming streetcar by none other than Condé Nast, and he was the owner of Vogue magazine. And he introduced Lee to its editor-in-chief, Edna Woolman Chase. Edna was looking for the next modern girl and put Lee on the cover of Vogue in March 1927. Making her one of the most in-demand fashion models in the late 1920s. In 1929, Lee left New York and headed to Paris, where surrealist artists were creating some of the strangest images anyone had ever seen. Lee went to Man Ray's studio and asked him to teach her the mysteries of surrealist photography. Together, they discovered new photographic techniques, contouring the human body and using props to create impossible dreamlike situations. Lee often modeled in front of the camera. In 1932, Lee moved back to New York and established a successful portrait studio. Never one to stay put for long, Lee left New York for Cairo and lived in Egypt for 3 years, where she took many photographs expedition across the desert. At the beginning of World War II, in 1939, Lee was living in London. She witnessed the German bombing, and instead of fleeing, she leaped into the chaos with a helmet on her head and camera in her hands. She worked as an official war correspondent for Vogue and captured the real-life surrealism during wartime Britain. In 1942, she was accredited as a U.S. Forces war correspondent and photographed the war and its aftermath until 1946. She documented the liberation of Paris and many battles throughout Germany. When the Americans arrived in Buchenwald and Dausch, Lee was one of the first photographers to document the horrors of the concentration camps and the genocide of the Jewish people. Her work helped to expose the Holocaust to the public. After the war, Lee had her only child with her husband, Roland Penrose. She occasionally worked as a photographer in the 1970s, but suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, from the war. In her later years, she became a gourmet chef and cooked elaborate feasts for her many friends. Lee Miller passed away in 1977, leaving behind an enormous amount of work that is still being discovered. Created surrealist photographs with Man Ray, was a war correspondent during World War II. Here's her quote. "Naturally, I took pictures. What's a girl supposed to do when a battle lands in her lap?" In 1941, her photos of Egypt were displayed at MoMA in New York. During the 1970s, her home in the English countryside was visited by her friends and many famous artists like Pablo Picasso, Max Ernst, and Man Ray. When the Allied invasion of Europe came in 1944, Lee was the only woman photojournalist in the front line. Was a surrealist gourmet cook making meals such as green chicken, marshmallows in a Coca-Cola sauce, and huge Elizabethan feasts. And that's it. I hope you all learned something today. Bye, friends.